Yes, sir. Can you hear me? You can hear me well too?
Yeah, yeah, we can definitely hear you.
Awesome. Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen real quick and then we can start. Give me 1 second. All right. How does that look?
Yeah, that's better there. Yeah.
Awesome. Perfect. Cool. Well, I'm pumped to speak to all of you today. And thanks again for having me, Lloyd. Content is near and dear to my heart. And I thought I can maybe replicate some of the experience that I collected over the years at various different companies. When I did a little bit of research a couple of weeks ago for this presentation, one thing that really stood out to me is that a lot of content topics have gained a lot of traction over the last couple of years. This is a screenshot from Exploding Topics showing the popularity of the topic content marketing on Google, YouTube, Amazon, Reddit, Quora, different platforms. And as you can clearly see, content marketing has become really popular over the last couple of years. SEO is the same way, has become really popular starting 2016. And then at the same time, content writing has really taken off as an art. So all these things are very connected. We know that content is absolutely crucial for SEO. Just this topic alone, for example, has exploded by over 300% over the last couple of years. And it's difficult, right? The point is that content is important as a growth driver in general, right? Not just for SEO, but surely for SEO. And the big key question is, how do you do it better than others? You know, how do you stand out and drive revenue with your content? That's why I thought that a good topic for this presentation or this conference would be unbeatable content strategies. You know, like how do you really stand out? And so I want to present 5 key concepts that I don't think I ever presented anywhere else or have written about. So yeah, very, very happy. First of all, if you were to think about these 6 different brands, Atlassian, Apple, YouTube, G2, Etsy, HubSpot, what would you say is the difference between them? Well, it's who creates the content. Companies, or better said, aggregators like YouTube, Etsy, G2, obviously grow with user-generated content. And companies like Apple, Atlassian, or HubSpot they grow with company-created content. They create all the content themselves. And that makes them a fundamentally different business, right? The way that the business grows and makes money is fundamentally different. And so this brings me to the first key principle, which is the difference between integrators and aggregators. Aggregators, they channel demand to have power over supply by providing a superior user experience. These are 3 key components of the idea of aggregators. And integrators, on the other hand, they own the customer relationship. And their only goal is to make the customer relationship better and strengthen that relationship over time. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this difference between aggregators and integrators. So aggregators, again, they grow with user-generated content. Their goal is to channel demand to have control over supply. And their way to scale is to have more users, right? From an SEO perspective and from content perspective, they grow with better or superior category pages, product pages, user profiles, right? And examples I already mentioned before. Integrators, on the other hand, they want to own all of the customer relationship, right? Their way to scale is to create more content or hire more writers. And there are different avenues to scale is, of course, the blog, but also content hubs, landing pages, tools. And if you want a couple more examples, you can think in integrators about Disney. Disney is probably the #1 integrator out there. And when they launched Disney Plus, that was the master move to symbolize that they want to own more of the relationship with the customers. So when it comes to growth, aggregators, they have to focus on category expansion. This is a screenshot of the SEO performance from Etsy. This is data from Systrix. And what you see here are 5 different subdirectories and their SEO performance over time. It's basically the visibility score, which reflects the traffic that they get based on their rankings. And as you can see, I highlighted one subdirectory here, which is the vintage category. And as you can see, in the last couple of years, the traffic to that category decreased, right? This is like a classic example. And so what you have to do if you're an aggregator like Etsy, you have to optimize at the template level, right? You have to look at your templates or page types like product pages, category pages, and you have to make sure that these templates provide the best user experience out there, right? It's a classic approach where you look at your template. If you're Etsy on the left side, you look at the main keyword in the middle side and how you compare against competitors, and then you do a side-by-side comparison of your template with the competitor's template for the same keyword, and look for things like content, internal linking, user experience, navigation, speed, and all of these classic SEO factors. As an integrator, you want to optimize on the topic level. This is something that most companies don't understand. If you optimize at the topic level, what you have to do is you have to look at all the keywords that are relevant and important within that category. In this example, it is the category, or sorry, the topic of agile. So you want to look at all the keywords in the topic of agile, and you want to look at how well you rank for them. And this is what I did here. This is just an example. I looked at the ranking position on the y-axis and the search volume on the x-axis. I looked at the top keywords. This is just a sample of the top 10 keywords in the topic agile and how Atlassian ranks. And what you'll see is that there are certain keywords that are really important, like the keyword agile or agile methodology, where there's still some room to rank higher for the company, right? And then there are a couple of other examples here. So this is how you think about optimizing at the topic level and covering the keywords. I also call this keyword coverage sometimes. And what Atlassian has done pretty well here is to create this content hub. It's not a blog, it's a hub with static content around all these different subtopics of Agile, like Scrum, Kanban, Agile project management, product management, and so on, right? This is the first key principle. Understand the difference between integrators and aggregators. The famous founder and investor, Peter Thiel, has a quote, which is, "Competition is for losers." One of my favorite quotes. And the way to bring it back to content is that we have all these techniques and methods, like the skyscraper technique, the creating these ultimate guides, topic clusters, and those techniques and methods, they work well. But at the same time, they lead to a never-ending race or competition, right? It's basically bottomless if you think about one-upping each other all the time and all the time. At the same time, if you look at how much content is being created, you see that the bar to content creation drops every year. On this chart, I have the number of websites compared to the number of active websites. This is, and basically what you see is that people create more websites every year, but the number of active websites is stagnating. So what this tells us is, in part, that it's easier to create a website, it's easier to create content than ever before. And yet at the same time, creating really good content is tough. And most people create sites, but don't maintain them, right? Or give up after a certain while. And so that leads me to the second principle, which is commodity content, right? When you look for recipes, for example, the thing is that all these websites look the same, right? There's barely any differentiation, barely any difference. Same for directories, right? When you look up a word, Google will give you the answer right away. When you look for holidays, Google will let you know when the holiday is, or when you look for very basic tutorials like how to change a tire, everybody can create content around that and can provide an answer. This is what I call commodity content, right? Everybody can replicate it pretty easily. But the important thing is to actually differentiate and to stand out, right? If we create a matrix with two axes, where one is replicable and the other one is unique, and we have the strength of the brands, we come up with a 4x4 that helps us to understand in what direction to move. So basically, if you have a weak brand as a company and your content is easy to replicate, you have commodity content, right? It's really hard to drive any business with it. At the same time, strong brands and very unique content that nobody else has leads to a lot of differentiation. And in between each of those two minimums and optimums, you have potential, right? So if you have unique content but a weak brand, invest in your brand. If you have a strong brand but commodity content or replicable content, then make sure that it becomes more unique. This is basically how to understand this. And so again, everybody can create content, which means that it's harder to stand out and you have to invest more time and energy. The third principle, right, relates to anybody being able to create content, and it's important to differentiate. But there's another challenge that we face, which is that people can reverse engineer your tactics, right? People can look at your content, see how you put it together, what you show, and based on that, do the same thing. And so the third principle is about content moats. Content moats are basically defenses for your content or for your company, which means doing things that others cannot replicate, and standing out from competitors who try to gain some of your market share or topic coverage. Good example of that is Amazon, right? Amazon reviews are so powerful that even when you buy a product on another site, you go to Amazon to do research and to see if the reviews are good, what people say. And you don't only look at the good reviews, you also look at the bad reviews. And this is a powerful moat from Amazon, right? Nobody can compete with Amazon reviews. Another example is Wikipedia. Wikipedia, one of the most trusted sources of information in the world, right? Whether you're a student and you do research on Wikipedia, or you're traveling and you just want to learn something about the place you're at, you go to Wikipedia. And the powerful thing about Wikipedia is that they have a whole army of crowdsourced editors and journalists who add more content, which is really, really difficult to replicate, right? It's very hard to compete with Wikipedia. And this is the idea. This is the ideal that you want to strive for as a company. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. One of them is to just scale the production, right? If you're a startup or if you have a lot of resources and a lot of money, you just create more content, better content, and you do it faster. Another way is to just increase the production value of content. This is another principle that a lot of companies forget, but content has a production value, like a Hollywood movie. And if the special effects look cheap, then the whole movie quality is bad. And the same applies to content, right? So the question is, can you produce higher quality videos than anybody else? Can you add an audio version of the article? Can you create outstanding GIFs or graphics or charts, right? All these things increase the production value of your content, which can be a moat. Another option is product integration. And when I speak about product integration, what I mean is to blur the line between content and your product. On the right-hand side, you see a screenshot from Canva, and they do that really, really well. They write and create tutorials or guides, and in these guides, they provide one-click buttons to use a template that they introduce in the guide in the product. And that is very, very elegant. And you can do that with different things. You can provide templates, you can provide articles. I sometimes call them tutarticles, basically mixes of tutorials and articles, or click dummies, but you basically make it easier for people to try out the product right in the content, which is also a moat. And then another one is co-marketing partnerships. This is one, a partnership between Buffer and Trello that you see on the screenshot here. And these are very, very different to replicate, right? The basic idea is to create, say, a PDF or a study or a data set together and then promote it on both content hubs like blogs or social media or email lists. Another content mode is unique data. And we always speak about, having unique data and providing unique data, but some companies, especially aggregators, can provide data that nobody else has. This, for example, is from Thumbtack. This is their product page for carpenters. And based on the zip code you enter, you get the range of costs or of hourly prices for carpenters in your area, right? Really well done, easily visualized. You get the key information right at the top, and this is something that only Thumbtack has. This is another example from Value Penguin, where they compare insurance companies for cars, so it's car insurance, and they do that in a very nice and appealing way. So it's very easy for users to find the key information, and I would also consider this a mode. Lastly, when we speak about modes, we also have to speak about the principle that's near and dear to my heart, which is the idea of content market fit. Most of you have probably heard about this idea of product market fit before, which is the point at which your product is so good that people, love it. They come organically without you doing marketing, and you have a real pull effect. The same idea can apply to content as well, and I call it content market fit. And the idea is here that your content is so good that you become the #1 reference in an industry. We already spoke about Canva as an example, but there are many others as well. HubSpot is a great example. Investopedia is an example. Healthline is an example. Headspace creates amazing content about meditation and mental health. And so there are companies out there that just create such good content that they're really hard to compete with. And I like to measure 3 different types of numbers or metrics for that. The one is engagement, and then conversion and distribution. And when you measure these 3 metrics in unison and you drive all of them up, that's when you iterate towards content market fit, right? You create more, you drive more subscribers. At the same time, people spend more time on your content, or they consume more of it, and you get more links and shares and so on. That's how to get closer to content market fit and establish yourself as a real authority in a space. So takeaway here is to measure several metrics at the same time, and to create content that competitors can't copy. When we think about the common content creation process, there is a life cycle that this content goes through. This is the 4th principle, or 4th key concept. And most of the time, we think about research, and then production or creation, and then the launch of the content. Sometimes we think about distribution, but that is not enough. What we actually have to think about at the same time is that the grooming and maintenance of content never really ends, right? You do have the 3 basic steps of research, production, and launch, right? As a 4th step, we add distribution. And then as a 5th step, we get traction. But if you think about content performance decreasing over time after it hits a peak, right? Most people just let the content die there, or they just prune it, or they say, well, we got to create more content. But the real key here is to go back to the content and upgrade it, or update it and refresh it. So this is something that people miss. They think about content as a linear journey, but in reality, content is a circular journey, right? It has a life cycle. And what I need to do as a company, if I want to be successful in the content game, is to groom the content over time and to monitor its performance, so that when the performance drops, I can go back and I can see what possibilities I have to improve it, right? Sometimes it's outdated, sometimes the link is broken, image is broken, but this is something that most companies miss. And as a result of that, they're spinning their wheels. They hit growth plateaus of organic traffic that they cannot overcome. Let's look at an example. This is a simple article, and what you see here are the clicks from Google Search Console over time. And it's very easy to note that after initial launch, the content hits a spike after about 2 months, and then gradually decreases and then flattens out, and then never really hits that same performance again. At the same time, if we look at, let's compare like these 3 articles, right? One is about the iPhone 12 Pro Max against 11 Pro Max. One is about best phone displays, and the other one is about iPhone Pro Max colors. And you see these same spikes, right? Like content gets traction and then slowly fizzles out and bleeds out. But when we zoom in and put the article about the best phone displays on a second y-axis, what's happening is that this content shows a different performance over time. It actually takes a little bit to gain traction, but then gradually increases and stays flat. It doesn't fizzle out, right? It doesn't drop in performance. But the problem is when we never look at content on a URL level, on a page level, when we only monitor keywords, we miss that perspective. And this is really important because if you look at organic traffic and aggregate as a whole, then all the different articles that we have on our blog or all the different content hubs blend into each other. And that's why we never really catch when content loses performance over time. Let me show you another example. This is a screenshot from Systrix and shows subdirectories of HubSpot, right? And what you see is that one of the biggest subdirectories, which is the marketing subdirectories, has actually started to decline in actually about a year ago. And if we take this subdirectory out, and we look at the sales subdirectory, which is the second strongest, it's been really flat, and then recently, a couple of months ago, started to decline as well. But when we take this one out, what we actually see is that one of the fifth or sixth strongest subdirectories, which is about website creation, website growth, is actually growing, right? And we can only see that on a subdirectory level. So we have to slice and dice our traffic by pages and by subdirectories to really understand how they're performing over time. Right. What we then see when we look at traffic on a URL level is that we see different traffic patterns that emerge. A very common one that I mentioned before is this flat and spiky pattern, which we typically see when the content focuses on topics with a very short lifespan, right? Like the next iPhone model, right? That's going to see a spike pretty soon when the next iPhone comes out and then probably drop again. So this site doesn't have enough evergreen content. At the same time, when the traffic trend is flat and declining, that means that typically there's too much outdated content, right? The net growth of organic traffic is not positive. There's too much outdated content and another focus on SEO. And at the same time, if the traffic trend is falling, that is often an indicator for technical issues and not enough throughput, right? There are not enough new articles, not enough new content that's being created, and potentially even a focus on the wrong topics. So the takeaway here is to look at traffic on a URL level or on a subdirectory level to understand the true performance of articles over time. And before we go into Q&A, I have a last fifth principle, and this is an important one. A common assumption that we have is that SEO or content is free, which is not completely wrong, but is also not completely right. In reality, every content piece has a certain cost. Content is not really free. When we think about this, let's look at two different types of content. One is an article that takes a certain amount to create, a certain amount of hours to create, right? You spend some time researching, writing, editing, creating images. Maybe you're faster, but there is a general range of 10 to 14 hours per article. Same thing when you create a video, right? You need to script it, film it, edit it. Takes a while to put together. Now, when we multiply that time, those hours, with an hourly salary of a freelancer, right? And I'm of course, I'm taking very broad averages here. Then it very quickly multiplies, where an article quickly reaches the cost of $1,000 and a video maybe, of over $600, probably even higher, right? The key idea here is that if content doesn't have a direct cost, like paid ads, for example, then it will have a time cost, an indirect headcount cost, right? And so it also has a time cost, not just because time is money, but also because it takes time to unfold its full potential. These are screenshots from the tool Ryte, R-Y-T-E, and what they show here is the average position of the keyword growth levers on my blog. And you see that in the beginning, it just takes a while to really pick up some steam, and there's some fluctuations, and then it hits a stride and a gradual performance. At the same time, on the right side, you also see the average position of 2 different keywords. And what this shows is that even when one keyword, maybe your main keyword, already ranks pretty well, Google starts to rank 2nd and 3rd and 4th keywords for it. So a piece of content can rank for many different keywords, and it just takes a lot of time for Google to trust your content more, so that it will gain more organic traffic, right? There's also a monitoring cost, right? We have to use tools, even though those tools can be free, but there's a monitoring cost. And I explained before how we have to tweak content, tune content, improve it over time. There's a life cycle. So that means you have to invest more resources into it. And it has a distribution cost. This is a screenshot from somebody who did link outreach to me. And even, like, how it doesn't matter how good that outreach is or not, but reality is, if you don't do outreach or if you don't do distribution, proactive distribution for your content, then it will probably not gain as much traction, right? Distribution can come in many forms. It doesn't have to be link building. It can also be sharing your content with an email list, but you even have to build that email list in the first place. So the takeaway, or the basic idea here, is that content has distribution costs as well. Right? And so there are all these different ways to look at costs, whether it's distribution, it's monitoring, it's time, or it's freelancer and headcount cost. Content in itself is not free, right? So the point is that if you calculate the cost of content, then you can really optimize and plan for it. But if you live with the notion that content is free, and you share that narrative with the company, you might create a false expectation to never really invest in content. But nowadays, because the bar to entry is so low, and because everybody can create content and differentiation is difficult, you have to invest real money into content and SEO. So let's break this down into, or let's basically summarize this into the 5 key concepts of an unbeatable content strategy. First, as I mentioned before, know your growth engine, right? Know if you're an aggregator or integrator, and scale content creation accordingly. You also want to focus on high production value. So you want to use high quality graphics, charts, images, videos, and you want to be unique. You want to stand out. You want to be the only one with a data set or with a certain piece of content. You also want to focus on building moats, which are defenses of your content in your business. And you want to invest wisely into your content. You want to treat it like an investment, like a real monetary asset that you put more money in over time to grow it, and then eventually harvest the returns. And with that, I think I'm pretty much at time for my presentation, but I'm very happy to focus on the questions now.
Thank you, Kevin. We have about 10 minutes left or so. So if you have any questions, I know I've got a few already. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A functionality in Zoom. So first question up. If you were to join a brand new startup, what would you focus on in your first 3 to 5 months to set your content strategy for success?
It's funny, because I had the opportunity to do that twice in my career without actually joining the startup. So what happened is I helped give birth to a brand new product line at Atlassian, where I worked, and at G2. And so at Atlassian, we focused on creating a competitor to Slack, which was called Stride. And at G2, we created a brand new product, which was called G2 Track. And both of these products were built with teams that technically belong to the same company, but in reality, we're working very independently with their own budget, with a very small and scrappy team. And so both of these times I worked on and created the content strategies. And both of these times, the first things that we did were talking to customers. We sat on sales calls, we listened to gong recordings of sales calls, and we even had just like sheer marketing conversations with customers and asked them about the key topics that they really care about. What are the problems in the topics? And we asked them where they did their research. And most of the times they did research on Google, but other times they also looked at platforms like Reddit, Quora, they asked their peers. This was all super helpful information because it allowed us to create a good content strategy. We also try to get a feeling for what kind of expectations people have. And when I say expectations, what I mean is, do they expect like a very high quality of content, very high production costs, or is it really about the key information? Do they have a lot of different touch points with lots of different sites, or is there like one authority in the space that they really focus on? And so again, I think it all comes back to talking to your customers, understanding how they do research and evaluation of products along the way, and then slowly iterate towards that. And sometimes you even keep a relationship with the customer, and you can ask them for real-time feedback. You can create some content and be like, hey, does this look appealing to you? Does this help you? Like how do you perceive that stuff? And from there, honestly, you can define everything else. But that's the first key step.
Perfect, thank you. And now I got a question from Nicole. First of all, she said thank you and great presentation. What are your thoughts on balancing search intent with differentiation in commodity content?
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, for that question. I think search intent is something you always want to keep in the back of your mind. And it's actually, it's a really good point and a really good question to bring up, because I think search intent can guide you toward differentiation in building modes. So when you see, for example, to take a step back real quick for everyone, search intent is basically the expectation that a user has when they search on Google. And it can actually be a fine understanding from Google's side of what people are actually trying to figure out. Right. So when you look for something like best hotels in New York City, it's pretty straightforward what you want. But if you only Google New York City, not that easy, right? You want restaurants, hotels, you want to know where it is, and so on and so on. And I think, or in my experience, by getting a good understanding of how Google interprets search intent or user intent, you can get a better understanding for how to create something that's really differentiated. A great example is Moz's beginner guide for SEO, right? This piece of content has driven thousands and hundreds of thousands of visitors over the last couple of years, and I'm sure a lot of business for the company. And so if you Google something like SEO and you see that beginners guides rank at the very top, that is an indication that Google expects beginners guides. And that's also an indication that users expect beginners guides. So now the next question is, how can you go in and differentiate yourself? I think brand and being an authority in this space is one way to do that. But you can ask yourself, what other things could you do? Could it maybe even be, I don't know, some life coaching of somebody who's new to SEO, or some like recording, or a mix of video and textual content, or maybe even something very interactive where you would learn how to optimize a site and you do it live on the website, right? Obviously, this is a far-fetched idea, but these are creative ways to think about differentiation when it's connected to searcher intent.
Great. And follow up to that then. So let's say that you are a startup or early stage company, and you're focusing on creating medical related content. How in the world do you compete with the Healthlines and the WebMDs of the world?
Yeah, it is a brilliant question because it is not easy. But I think there's a way. And so the key question you have to ask yourself is, what do people really value when they consume medical content? And my take is that they really value experts and an understanding of the topic, right? Experts are expertise because we live in times of fake news and mistrust, right? Like you really have to make sure that you signal and prove to users that you are a very trustworthy source of information. So then the question is, how can you do that? Healthline, for example, all their content is reviewed by doctors, and you can ask yourself, is there a way that I can take this even further? Maybe doctors create the content in the first place. Maybe you interview them. Maybe you do something else to put that expertise even more in the foreground. And then the second thing that people value is to get an understanding from somebody they trust about a complicated medical topic, right? When you have a cold, that's one thing. But when you have a serious medical issue, or you think you have a serious medical issue, then all of a sudden it can become very difficult to understand what it is and how to treat it, what the symptoms are, right? Like I'm sure everybody has in their life before Googled something where they thought they had an injury or something else, and then all of a sudden got really concerned because they found this rare disease that fits to their symptoms. And so this is a common problem, and you want to think about it as a company. How can you make it easier for people to really find the key information they're looking for and make it trustworthy and demonstrate your expertise?
Great. Next question. Will artificial intelligence writing replace content writers?
It's a funny question because I did change my mind about that. Even up until maybe a year ago, I think I was very skeptic of that. I did not expect AI or machine learning to come close to replacing writers anytime soon. And then I saw some tools and I did change my mind. I'm not sure that AI will completely replace writers. I do think now, though, that AI will replace very low-level tasks that writers typically take on. I think, for example, creating ad copy, I think that's pretty dated. I think pretty soon we can use AI for that. I think product description content is another one of these use cases where it's not actually that nice even for a writer to create product description content, right? So I think these low-level tasks will be taken over by machine learning probably in the next 12 to 24 months. I think we're pretty close there, to be honest. And I think this will become a real topic in the next 3 to 5 years. Is this content created by a machine or by a human? And with all the mistrust going on and all the fake news and blockchain and crypto and all these trends around expertise and trustworthiness, I wouldn't be shocked if there was a requirement to indicate when content has been created by a machine or not. At the same time, though, I think it can still be very useful, even if it has been created by a machine. So that's a long and windy way to say, I don't think writers will be completely replaced by AI. I think it will in the future be a way to differentiate yourself, right? To say, hey, this is proven content created by a human. But I think we'll see a lot more cases where machines create the content, will create it better and cheaper and faster than humans, and it will become a new norm.
And this next question is from Nithin. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Hi, Kevin. Feeling lucky to be part of the session. You mentioned about perspective while creating the content. Do you keep in mind the keywords while you are in a framework creating content, or do you include the keywords at a later stage? And how likely do you use semantics in the content?
That's a very good question, Nathan. Thanks for asking that. I think whether you start with the keyword or not, I think both angles or both approaches and ways are totally fine. But I do think that, these days, just having an objective generic stance on most topics is actually a missed opportunity. I think having a strong opinion, about most topics, right? Not when it comes to facts, but when it comes to other topics or other situations, I think then it's perfectly fine to provide an angle about a topic. And I think you can either start with a keyword or you can add it later. When it comes to semantics, I do pay attention to semantics. And basically, when we speak about semantics, the basic idea is to say, okay, what are all the components of a topic that I need to pay attention to, right? So when it comes to SEO, for example, semantics would be related keywords like search engine optimization, or like maybe even content marketing, technical SEO. These are all semantically related keywords to the main keyword, but there can also be variations, right? SEO and search engine optimization basically mean the same thing, but they're semantically equivalent, but there are different ways to express the same thing. And so I do pay attention to semantics when I create content. There are some really good tools out there that do it for you, or you can try common sense or logic. But I think it's not as important anymore these days because search engines and especially Google have become really good at understanding what the content is about. I think much more than semantics, I really think about the key pieces of information, right? So we talked about diseases before in medical content. Key pieces of information there are the symptoms, the treatment, and maybe a couple of other pieces and facts. And I think that's what's really important to pay attention to, even when you express an opinion. If you want that opinion to rank high on Google and make some headwaves, you probably want to make sure that you focus on some key pieces of information. Oops, I think we lost Lloyd there for a second. I'll just stay put and let me see what other questions I can find here in the chat. If I missed something. Looks like I caught most questions. I think I technically have 4 more questions. So if there are any other questions, please add them to the chat or in the Q&A function. Lloyd is back. Lloyd, I'm just going to make you, you're the host. Okay, perfect. I think we're good there. Chris has a question. What role do you see blockchain playing in content marketing? Well, thank you, Chris. You know, this is another one of these topics where for the longest time, I was looking for a connection between blockchain and content marketing. Until I had a conversation with Joost, and actually have that conversation recorded on my podcast. If you look for Joost, Kevin Indig, you'll find this. It's on YouTube. And Joost is actually an investor in a startup. I think it's called WordLift. And what that startup does is they basically provide a timestamp that lives on the blockchain to prove that they were the first to publish a piece of content, right? A big, or not a big, but a problem in the content marketing space is that other sites that are sometimes stronger than you might steal your content and rank higher with it. And that startup provides a blockchain solution. And so I think this idea of original information and being the first one with a piece of information, I think that is something that the blockchain can solve. And that's actually going to become very interesting in the next couple of years, right? I already spoke about this idea of mistrust and fake news. And I think there will be more solutions to these problems that live on the blockchain because it provides a unique way to identify who the first provider of the piece of information was. I hope that answers your question. There might be some use cases that I don't see now that are going to come up to the blockchain. It's actually a very exciting space, but this is one tangible one that I think that we'll see. Yeah, I saw your answer in the chat, Chris. It's word proof, it's not word lift. Yeah, glad you're already using it. Thank you for that question. I think there was one last question, which is how do you manage a demanding full-time job in your own content projects? You know, there are a couple of things to do that. First of all, I have a very rigid schedule. I set aside time for content creation. The other thing is that I do create a lot of content all the time anyway. I take a lot of notes. I'm a voracious note taker, and I journal a lot, you know, and that gives me ideas, that makes me aware of things that I pick up in my day-to-day, which is where most of my inspiration comes from. And then I manage my schedule very tightly. I work a lot. I think that also helps. And I just have a lot of practice, right? I've been doing this for 10 years and I haven't put out or published content for the longest of that time. And so a lot has accumulated over the years, and I also found my workflow. The last point is that I love it, I just really enjoy it. I really think I found my vocation. And so it's probably less draining for me to create content. I have 1 minute left, if I'm correct. And there's one last question from Ula Dislau. And the question is, what's your opinion on the next big thing after topic clusters, microsites with a comparable power for search? Well, first of all, thanks for the question. I think it's tough to say. I think there's still a lot to squeeze out of microsites, content hubs, static formats. I think tools are celebrating a little bit of a comeback. We see very good results with that at Shopify as well. Yeah, I think this idea of having a blog, which is basically a time-based format, right? The news content ranks at the top or is visible at the top. and at the same time having a more static content format like microsites or like content hubs, which provide an entry point for a more linear user journey. I think a mix of those two is what's really going to do best in the future. And maybe there's a new format that provides more valuable, or a new concept, but I'm not sure yet what the next thing will be. With that, thank you all very much. Appreciate you tuning in. Lloyd, thanks for having me and everybody else. And, I think I want to pass it over to Daisy Ray, and all the best.
Perfect. Thank you. You'll be passing it over to me. I appreciate it. My name is Lloyd Silver. I'll be hosting today. We have a jam-packed schedule, so it's 9:30 and time for our next session. We're going to go straight into it. So we have the dynamic duo from Digital Magenta, Jennifer Applin, Alice Chandrasekaran. They're going to be talking about using data and unlocking growth by using the right data. So Jennifer and Alice, I'm going to be making you a co-host right now.